Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to IORadio with your host, Adam. Sal is not around today. He is busy with some other stuff. So what we've got is an interview with a crypto unicorn. This is pretty cool. As many of you may know, I put it out there that we're willing to engage with anybody who's into crypto and have a discussion. Can we have a productive discussion? Can we meet some common ground? So I continue to be open to try to have these dialogues with people that are into crypto where the critics and the enthusiasts can face off and we can have a discussion and find out whether or not we can accomplish anything productive. And today I've got another one of these, and I'm calling it an interview with a crypto unicorn because we have, and I'm taking this person at their word, and I don't have any reason to not believe them. And when you hear them, you can probably sense there's no reason for them not to be sincere about things. But we have somebody who has gone all in on crypto. That's right. They have taken the majority of their life savings and put it all on Bitcoin. Now, we've heard in the past that there's lots of stories of people doing that, liquidating their IRAs or, mortgaging their home and buying it all on Bitcoin. But you generally kind of sense that it's more of like a rumor than a reality. Like our typical impression is that, some guy's got $300 worth of Bitcoin, but he's posting all over the internet that he's leveraged his house and all of that. It's just, part of the whole the circle of propaganda that many of us believe accompanies this industry. But today I've actually had a conversation with somebody who I actually believe sincerely has done this. They have gone all in on Bitcoin, and we're going to talk. We're going to find out what they believe and why they've done this. And I'm hoping that maybe this will be the first in a series of conversations with this particular person, because I feel like this may be one of the first times I've actually had a relatively productive or useful, non-hostile conversation with a crypto person. And I'd like to continue it. I'd like to see how this plays out, because we've both given each other some food for thought. And I'd like to think that this will be the first in maybe some more conversations. And I want you to listen along and let me know what you think. Now, I know it's very easy if you're a critic like me to just dismiss this guy and say, oh, geez, he's crazy. This is not the most smartest investment thing I've heard. But try to put yourself in his shoes, employ a little bit of empathy, and assume that he has good intentions. Now, again, nothing is guaranteed. We don't really know. This is such a wide topic that there's so many different directions you can go in. And we didn't get really deep into the things because he immediately started off with some premises that I felt like we had to, address. Often when you talk with crypto people, they will just spew a long string of premises that might take an entire show just to argue, is Bitcoin an actual store of value? So we have to. It's a little bit tedious, but it's important to drill down into these things because they're the fundamental foundation that a lot of these people that believe in crypto base their confidence on. So we started to talk about the basics and we got into it, and you get to hear this. And I would say, let's try to see if we can relate to this guy and whether or not there is a way that we can reach him. Like I said, I'm open to being convinced that I'm wrong as well. And of course, the ultimate crypto question absolutely did come up in this conversation, and I'll let you see whether or not you feel it was appropriately addressed or not. So stay tuned and welcome to the episode. So, what do you want? What do you want me to call you? You want me to call you by your regular name or what?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm not super concerned about it, but I think just from a internet hygiene best practices, I could go by a pseudonym. You can just call me Ryan.
Okay, I can do that. I kind of have an idea of what I want to accomplish with some of these kind of situations where I talk with crypto people, but I'm also kind of open to having my mind changed and seeing where the conversation goes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to, based on our emails earlier, obviously I was trying to set some type of rubric or whatever. But you're just as right as anybody that this is a very wide topic, right? The lanes are really, really wide. It's like multidisciplinary. There's going to be a lot of subjects that go back and forth. I was most intrigued by it looks like you have kind of like a thesis written out here about talking points for crypto. And I think that provides kind of a nice container at
Hmm.
least. And it's obviously stuff that you've already thought a lot about. So it kind of seems pretty fertile. As I said, when I got in contact with you, I had listened to your last episode about number go up. And I kept hearing what sounded to me like it was like I agree with you on actually a whole lot of stuff. But the only sticking point I kept finding myself bumping into is that I was kind of like, a lot of this stuff just doesn't apply to Bitcoin, right? And so it's kind of one of these things where we're almost like 99% of the way there. Um, Kind of like what's the old saying? The atheist just goes one God further than the Christian,
Right, right.
kind of thing. So yeah. I remember you had mentioned something about kind of wanting to know how I ended up where I'm at, and particularly like how both of us ended up maybe where we are. I
Hmm.
know you've got um, obviously you've probably talked and thought about this more than I have, just based on my kind of rough research, right? Like you're a moderator on one of the subreddits,
Right.
right? Like so you've probably dealt with all manner of people
Yeah, mainly.
and all
Yeah,
manner.
mainly because I'm accused of a lot of stuff. So a lot of my reactions are very defensive, which is also one of the reasons why I tend to have a little bit of a snarky and a condescending attitude. It's just it lends itself when you're being attacked. Oftentimes an emotional attack and not a logical attack to just come back with, well, who are you? You know.
Yeah, yeah. People's egos get tied up in this really easily, which is unfortunate. I've actually probably had some of my nastiest run-ins with other Bitcoin people. Um, they tend to be kind of eat their own,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of what would you call it, purity testing going on, which I find kind of counterproductive. You're these people are like you should find what you have in common with people, and you catch more flies with honey and all that. But in your case, like I said, I could kind of tell like you've probably been in the thick of it, and so
Well, let me address that. Let me address
uh,
that right off the bat.
yeah,
So, because we'll want to know who you are, where you come from, what your motivation and rationale is to get into crypto. So, let me explain where I am being anti-crypto. Even though I've said it a bunch of times, but I'm always honing this response, and it changes a little bit depending upon the context. If I'm talking with a software engineer, I'll talk about it more from technical terms. If I'm talking philosophically, I'll talk about it from a different perspective. But basically, I don't hate Bitcoin. I don't hate crypto people. I actually love new technology. People accuse me of being, a boomer. Okay, boomer. I don't, I'm out of touch with stuff. I consider all that kind of distractions. Why do you hate crypto, or why do you love fiat? You must love the government since you're critical of crypto. I find all that to be kind of distractions. The operative thing is if you've got something that you think is the future and it's a technology and it's useful, then you have to be able to demonstrate that me, as well as other people, would find it useful. And that doesn't mean that you found some guy in Costa Rica at a coffee shop that's using it. You have to have a better argument than that. Demonstrate how it does something better than what we already have. And that's the essence
hmm
of my criticism, right? Is from the moment that Bitcoin and blockchain came out, it's promised all these things. It was going to revolutionize currency and banking and a hedge against inflation and all of this. And when you drill down into each of these claims, they fall apart. And that's the essence of where I am. I like stuff that's backed up by logic, reason, and evidence. And so That's the basis
Yeah.
of my skeptical attitude. I haven't.
Okay. Well, I had noticed a kind of a through line that you seem to reference blockchain and this. I think you have like a question that you pose to the greater
Right.
community that you don't feel has been sufficiently answered, and that is like, what can blockchain do for me that everything else on offer can't already do,
Yeah,
right? And
I
I
call it the
actually,
ultimate
yeah,
crypto question. And remember, I'm not assuming anybody listening is familiar with any of our other work, so I kind of want to, always back up a little bit and explain what we're talking about. It's called the ultimate crypto question. It's very simple. Explain very specifically. Give me one specific example of something that blockchain does that is better than existing non-blockchain technology. That doesn't include something that's criminal or that something that solves a problem that blockchain created. That's and of course people compare blockchain to all kinds of other technology, the internet, the printing press, the light bulb, the wheel. But I can answer that question about any of these other things. A microwave oven, what does it do that's better? What does the internet do? Email was a revolutionary feature of the internet. It clearly improved upon the existing traditional mail system. So again, you don't have to be super technical to answer that question. And I have not
right.
gotten a good answer for blockchain.
Okay. Well, that's one of the things I had thought
Okay.
on in the days leading up to this talk. So I feel like I want to definitely address
Let's
that.
do
We'll
it.
put a pin in that, and I'll back up just a tiny bit just to say like, who I am real quick at a broader level and where my brain is at on this subject,
Okay.
right? Um, like I said, in our correspondence offline, I don't have any credentials. I don't pretend to have any credentials. I am as retail of, Joe Schmo as there could possibly be. I found out about Bitcoin, kind of during the 2017 bull run. It caught my eye just in terms of like, wow, what's going on here, right? Like a lot of people, I jumped into the space with just a typical like analog era investor attitude of like, all right, well, there's this new thing. It's these electronic coins, whatever else. I'll just buy a stack of each of the top 10 and we'll see which one floats to the top, right? And obviously, there's a crash immediately following such run-ups, and I paper-handed my way out of that real fast.
Which is what
kind of lost my.
that's what traditional investors or speculators in most markets do. They don't try to get 100x. If they can get a little bit, they get a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't even get a little bit. I just got shellacked, which, that's most people's, I think they, touch the electric fence kind of thing. And then a few years on, probably like 2019, I was saving up trying to make my first house purchase. And I I'm in a pretty competitive housing market. And I was like, okay, I'm sitting on this war chest of money and it's going to sit around for at least 2 or 3 years, right? This is long-term planning. I knew there's kids on the way. We got a family coming, all that. Like we're going to have to upsize, right? And I didn't want that money to just sit around doing nothing.
Of course.
The best I could surmise was like, all right, well, I've got these S&P index funds, but I didn't want something really riskier than that. So for the first time in my life, I really was sitting on a lot of capital and I just didn't know what to do with it. And I thought it would be opportunity wasted. Now, looking back on it, even though the end of that story is I put that money into Bitcoin, the 2021 or 2020 bull run happened. And, I didn't actually end up cashing out all of it. I just actually skimmed out some decent profits, used that as part of my down payment on my home. So it was very beneficial to me in that way. But looking back on it, even that moderate success story there, right? I realized what a fool I was just because of what I know now about Bitcoin and how it behaves and the greater like economic cycles that were at play. Because what I did wrong there was I didn't realize that Bitcoin effectively behaves in these kind of like 4-year cycles, where if you're looking for a store of value and you're not storing it for longer than that 4-year cycle, you might as well just be a day trader. Like you're really risking a lot. And I'm so lucky I didn't get wiped.
And I want to make sure that we don't, because you say these things casually, that I feel are like begging the question, right? This notion that, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do think it's going to be important because it's very easy to gish gallop over little casual points. This Bitcoin behaves in a 4-year cycle. I don't think there's any real way to prove that technically. It may seem like there's some cycles, and I know the halvening has some impact on things, but it's important to point out that this is not a traditional security that anybody can perform what we would normally consider to be due diligence on, right? If you own stock in a public company, they're compelled by law to produce quarterly reports and to make their books public and audited by independent parties. So you can get a good look at what this venture is that you've invested in, and whether they're doing well, whether they're making money, whether they're losing money, how many assets they have. And if they misrepresent that, they can be held liable and you can sue them, right? In the world of crypto, there is no such mechanism, there is no such regulation, there is no such oversight. If you hold Bitcoin, you don't hold shares in any kind of company that produces annual reports or anything. We don't know what these exchanges, how much liquidity they have. We know very little information about what the nature of the trading activity is at Binance or Coinbase. They're just barely allowed to exist in the market. They're nothing like banks.
Right.
So to speculate about any crypto and whether it has a predictable cycle, I think is highly presumptuous.
I will grant you that in terms of the amount of data points we have, right? Like we're really young. This project is 15 years old. So
I don't consider that to be
like,
very
for
young,
example,
15 years, but
well, when you're looking at it through the lens of like myself, where I think it's going to be around as long as the internet is around, it feels pretty young, right? So if it crashed and burned, like, in the next, 30 to 50 years, like, yeah, it would not be young necessarily. So
well, if you look in the world of technology startups, 15 years is a tremendously long time for anybody to have market share in the technology world. Now we're kind of in the late stage capitalism information age where you've got these mega corporations like Google and eBay and Amazon, and they're obviously maintaining market share longer, but it's mainly because of just this overwhelming dominance they have and almost monopolistic behavior. But in the startup world, 15 years is like a lifetime. It's like several lifetimes. If you look at what happened from, say, late 95 to 2005, just in that 10-year period, there was probably tens of thousands of startups that had tremendous potential and then just disappeared completely. So I would put Bitcoin in the same category as those things where it's, 15 years is a long, long, long time. So you could say, hey, it's still around after 15 years. That's a sign it may have some substance to it. But I would also argue that if you look at what Bitcoin was 15 years ago, it was marketed as something completely different than it is now. It's kind of like, pets.com starting out as a pet store and then later on selling pharmaceuticals, So.
Yeah, I think the age question, it really depends on how you define Bitcoin, right? Like you're defining it more as a piece of technology or, a startup company, something like that. I define it as more of a protocol, right? Like a language or some type of interface. And protocols tend to be very, very sticky, right? They tend to have, if they catch anyway, they tend to stick around for a long time, like the English language. Gold as a medium of exchange, as a protocol.
Explain this protocol to me. Explain to me specifically what Bitcoin is and why it's different from any other crypto or blockchain.
So let me back up.
Now, I'm a software engineer, so when you say protocol, it means something very specific to me.
Yeah. So in my mind, when I say protocol, it's kind of like the rules of the game, right? Like the ways that you're allowed to communicate. In this case, we're communicating value, right? The ways you're allowed to interface.
You're claiming you're communicating value. I would argue with that.
Right. And so all these things, I think, an experienced listener anyway would probably be able to pinpoint the points where like I'm making a statement that needs some type of proof attached to it, or you are,
Right.
right? And we're going to make a lot of those statements towards each other during this type of conversation because we're coming at it from such very, very opposite poles, right? And so we don't have to stop every time somebody says something that begs the question necessarily. We can try to make cases, and if we find something interesting enough to pull at, we can.
Well,
So,
let me address that right there. I think
mhm,
one of the reasons why we're in this mess with the crypto industry is because so much of that happens. So many people in the crypto field, when they're talking about crypto, are constantly begging the question. They're making 4 or 5 unstated premises in one single sentence, and they gish gallop over it. Like you will say, so as we know, the Bitcoin protocol involves transferring value to this and that, a peer-to-peer system transferring value. I can actually prove logically and rationally that it doesn't transfer any value and it's not actually even peer-to-peer. But people will say that, and if you don't stop and go, hold up, that's not been proven. And I know what you're saying. Our whole conversation could grind to a halt. But I do think it's
mhm,
important because this is one of the things that happens in mainstream media that bugs the crap out of me. Forbes and all of these media sites just gloss right over these claims that people, oh, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer money system. No, not actually. It's not peer-to-peer. Bitcoin allows you to transfer value. No, no, no. A value is highly subjective in this case. It's not objective. Like fiat is
mhm,
objectively valuable because it's imposed as a method of payment by the state. So if you want to pay your taxes and you want to pay your electric bill and you want to do all that, whether you believe in it or not doesn't matter. It has utility because the state mandates it. Bitcoin doesn't have that same stability as a transfer of value. If I own Bitcoin and I want to send it to somebody, I have to find somebody that values it. It's like a Star Wars action figure or a Beanie Baby. Some people will value it, but most people don't consider it a store of value. And those are little. I know they're little things that we just kind of gloss over, but I think it's really important to make it known.
yeah, those are really deep pools that we're kind of stepping over, right? Like what is value, right? And the subjectivity of value. And
Right.
obviously it's valuable to me and it's valuable to the other people on the network who are participating. So, but to you, it's not valuable. So
And
that
I
that
represent
is gonna
mainstream. I'm representing the voice of the majority of people who don't dabble in crypto.
right.
And of course, anybody who is pro crypto, it's part of their agenda usually that they want to spread the word. It's almost an evangelical process where they want to let other people know the good news. And of course, that's where we got to kind of
Hmm.
temper things.
Um, yeah, let me hop back a little bit to I think the original question, which was, this what is blockchain doing for me, right? Um, so I'll
Yeah,
back up
what
a
is
little
this
bit. So
protocol that you think is the essence of Bitcoin?
so I can unwind that a little bit, and I can retract any statements, subjective statements, right, about value, and just say protocol, meaning that if you go to the Webster's dictionary and look up protocol, I could literally just probably nod my head and say, yeah, that's what I meant, right? Like it's the rules of the road, how you're allowed to interface with this certain thing, right? All the X's and O's of the playbook, right? Like what you're allowed to do on the field, on the
And so, if
pitch.
I interpret what you're
Um,
saying, like even though you didn't fully formulate your thought, you basically believe that Bitcoin is a formula that allows people to transfer value. Would that be a fair characterization of one of the things you believe?
in practice, that's how I'm finding it to be for
Right.
me, is that I'm communicating like when I go and I send X amount of this thing and write that on this big public running
Hmm.
ledger, that's what I am in that moment trying to communicate, right? Is X amount of value, and that value right now is obviously measured in fiat because that's
Right.
the dominant unit of account or system that we use for measurement. Um, how long, there's all kinds of theories about how long that will be, or if it's ever going to change or whatever. But for the time being, so anyway, the point that I brought up protocol for was just to say, looking at it through the two different purviews, if you look at it through the view of a protocol, those things tend to stick around a whole lot longer versus the things you're talking about, where it's like, IBM as a 100-year-old company is like a total unicorn. Like, technology companies don't last that long.
Mm-hmm.
They don't make it that far. So 15 years for a startup, quote unquote, yeah, that's like, you're over the hill, man. But when we're talking about something along the lines of like a language, or for example, the internet, TCP/IP,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I think that's going to be around for a very, very long time, and Bitcoin is just something that rides the rails of TCP/IP. So
okay, but there's a lot of protocols out there that are obsolete. I mean, fax transmissions are obsolete. So just because something is a design, communications kind of design, doesn't mean that it's revolutionary or that everybody else should adopt it.
Yeah, no, technology getting supplanted, right, is tale as old as time, right? And that's where a protocol getting supplanted, it doesn't happen quite as often, right? A new piece of tech, the new phone, the new a car, whatever, those are pieces of kit, not necessarily like the protocol of the wheel. The protocol of the internal combustion engine.
Okay.
Actually, that actually is a piece of
Well,
technology.
let's actually.
But
no.
This is
This is a good way of drilling down into it. Okay, but I would argue that there are protocols each and every day that become immediately obsolete. If you look at the internet, right? There were information networks around before the internet, right? They all had different kinds of protocols. How one system communicates with another is basically by following a set of rules they both agree to. So before the internet was ubiquitous, it was bulletin board systems, right? It was individual PCs using the phone lines and modems. That protocol is obsolete, but before that, there were information networks that were little walled gardens, like the Source and CompuServe and stuff like that. And those protocols are long gone. And the internet came along, and TCP/IP was one of the protocols that was used. But the protocol itself wasn't what was really valuable. It was what the protocol enabled. It was what unique feature. So CompuServe was an information system before the internet, and unless you're older, you probably wouldn't have any experience with it. But you'd connect to it, and you paid by the minute, I think, to access it.
You're right.
And
I am old enough to know what CompuServe is.
So, and the problem is you could only CompuServe had email services too. You could email other CompuServe members, and our IDs were like a 5-digit number, comma, and then a 6-digit number. So it was like you'd email 47392, 801, and that would be your cousin or somebody. It was kind of crude by today's standards, but it worked. But it only allowed you to communicate with other CompuServe users. So if somebody was on the Source or another network, they were out of luck. And the internet, since it was created by the government, it wasn't owned by any particular company, was much more open source, right? So
that's right. Yep.
It wasn't the protocol so much as how the protocol was implemented and whether or not it offered something that was an advantage over the existing way. So when I was using CompuServe, all I could do was communicate with CompuServe people. But if I flipped to the internet, I could communicate with CompuServe people. I could communicate with the Source and all these other networks. Whichever network became dominant, everybody else would be compelled to make their systems compatible. So that, again, I can answer that ultimate question by saying, why was the internet better than CompuServe? Because the internet wasn't owned by any single person, and it allowed me to communicate with anybody that was connected to the internet, regardless of who they used to get online through.
And to me, that's a brilliant analogy that you could graft onto Bitcoin.
Okay, explain to me how
say,
Bitcoin fits into that.
So the broader internet, right, that you just referenced versus CompuServe and its proprietary, nature is a perfect analog to me. Whereas Bitcoin is, right, it's owned by no one, completely open, anyone can participate.
Stop. Okay. this Bitcoin is owned by nobody. This is another issue that I think is not completely accurate as well. And in my documentary, I have a section called debunking points. And one of the points is Bitcoin is decentralized and not under anybody's control. And that's in my documentary. And I go over how Bitcoin was created as well as Ethereum. And I point out that there's a small development team that controls the source code for Bitcoin. And who's on that development team and how they get on that development team is not at all a democratic process. It's not even transparent. There's some obscure message board buried somewhere in the internet where somebody's keeping track of who seems to have commit access to those repositories. There's also the MIT Digital Media Initiative, which is a little loose coalition of people that are supposed to be involved in developing the Bitcoin core. They're funded by a handful of corporations. And some of those corporations are creating L2 solutions like the Lightning Network. So there's plenty of evidence to indicate that the people controlling Bitcoin are influenced by certain special private interests. And we could also point to Ethereum and cite something like the DAO hack, where when somebody hacked Ethereum, the developers unilaterally, without any kind of real consensus, decided to roll the blockchain back. So this notion that crypto and blockchain is not under anybody's control, I think if you look deep enough, you'll find that's not necessarily the case.
So I'm going to disagree for a little bit. So let me try to formulate how and why. So there is nothing stopping me right now from proposing some type of change to Bitcoin, right? And putting it out there and letting the universe vote on it, whether or not it would
let's
be
say you
so that's what I mean.
Let's say you came up with an idea that would make Bitcoin scalable and faster, right? It could handle more transactions, and it could scale a little bit faster. Right now, it does anywhere from 4.7 to 7 transactions a second. We're talking about BTC. So hypothetically, there's nothing stopping you from creating your own version of Bitcoin that's a slight modification to the code that works better. Okay, so why isn't that the dominant Bitcoin?
Well, because it's up to the network to decide, right? Like it's a democratic process where whoever decides what is the best code base, that will be the code base going forward. Like it's all these nodes vote on all these nodes, and all these miners are voting all the time, right? On what is voting. Bitcoin.
Is there a constitution? Is there some kind of set of rules that clearly says here's how people vote? How do you qualify that consensus process?
Yeah. That's the beauty of it, right? Is that
there's no rules. There's no real understanding of what makes consensus work.
No, I mean there are rules. That's what the protocol is about, right? So that's when people talk about like a 51% attack on the network, right? Like you could say, okay, well, I just brute force my way and I overtake all the computing power of the network, and I'm the majority of the computing power on the network, and therefore I get to decide the rules, right? Like that was the real vulnerable scenario for Bitcoin during its earliest days, right? Was that it was quite easy for anybody to come in and kind of step on it in that way and bulldoze it and run roughshod.
So you're saying because there's
process.
More miners and more hash power, the network is more secure. That's a common talking point. But I don't think that has anything to do with what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is you argue that Bitcoin is like it's a money protocol for the people, and as a person you're free to create your own version of Bitcoin if you don't like the existing Bitcoin. Okay, but why is the current version BTC? Why is it the dominant one? You're saying quotes because that's it. I mean, why? Where was the vote?
The crowd. The wisdom of the crowd has decided.
How?
That, like
how was it
example,
decided? On what date was this vote taken? How many votes were done for? How many votes were done against? How do we know?
I mean, it's every minute of every day, right? Like as the miners and the nodes are running, like it's isn't it a continuous vote?
I gotcha.
Right? Like that's the way I
see
basically,
it. So basically, the Bitcoin industry is like a big hill, And on any given day, you just look up at the top and you see whoever's at the top deserves to be at the top because they're at the top, right? There's no other mechanism there, right? There's no other mechanism to qualify why they're at the top or how they got up to the top. It's just if they're up at the top, they're in charge. I'm trying to understand how that makes any kind of real consensus. Because see, like in a traditional system where there is a consensus mechanism, like in a country where there's elections, there's a ruling authority that enforces a very specific set of rules. Here's who can vote. Here's when they can vote. Here are the votes. We make them public so that the process of achieving consensus becomes transparent and everybody can see it and accept it. I see nothing like that in crypto. It's just whichever coin seems to be the dominant version of this or that, they won the election. I mean,
yeah, let's stop for a second. I want to decouple Bitcoin and crypto for a second because I will never use those terms interchangeably. And I feel like it gets a lot of dirt on the discussion, at least from my part, when the sins of the broader crypto industry, are looped into the Bitcoin discussion, right? So for my purposes, I'm only talking about and defending Bitcoin. I have no interest in anything beyond that, not even Bcash, not Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. I don't like Ethereum. Like you'll never find me dabbling in any of that other stuff because it's all unregistered securities that are centrally controlled, and I have no interest in such a thing.
By the way, if you're following along at home, this is Stupid Crypto Talking Point number 16. That Bitcoin is different. Right.
Let me scroll down and find that one so I know what you think on it.
It's reddit.com/r/crypto reality/wiki/talking points. No, reddit.com/r/crypto reality-wiki-talking points.
Wiki-talking points. Cool. Because I only made it to 15. I never saw 16.
28 talking points now.
There's 28 of them. Oh my God, I got more homework to do. All right.
This Bitcoin is different thing. Again, this is what it's hard to have a conversation because a typical Bitcoin conversation gish gallops over all kinds. Oh, Bitcoin is different. Bitcoin is a store of value. Hold it. Stop. Let's address each one of those things individually.
Yeah, I don't mind resting on that for a while because that's one of my favorite topics.
Let's address two of the little elements that you brought up. First off, you suggest that Bitcoin may behave differently than Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV or Ethereum. I feel like I could make a very strong case for anything that you could accuse a shitcoin, even like Cumrocket or Doge. I can say the same mechanism happens in Bitcoin. It just happens on a different level or a larger scale, or the people doing the pump and dumps are a little bit more publicly known, but I would say all the mechanisms are exactly the same. The same level of quote consensus exists in Bitcoin as it does in Doge. There's still largely a development team that nobody really knows who they are.
Isn't Doge effectively just a copy paste of Bitcoin with it's just meant to it's a jerk off coin, right? It's just meant
just like Bitcoin is.
It's a meme coin, right? So, so real quick, what you were talking about, this kind of like central cabal of people who control Bitcoin, like that's news to me, honestly. And if that is true, and that I don't have a vote in what changes are going to be adopted to the protocol, like that shatters the entire ethos of Bitcoin, right? And if that ends up being true, what you have done is you've just, well, if that's true, then you just completely shattered the entire use case of it, right? So I would probably focus on digging more into that, because that is bedrock foundational principle stuff. We don't have to talk about it now because like I don't know up or down about any cabal. I do know that, right, if that group of people, I'm sure there's groups of people everywhere who propose changes to Bitcoin and whatever else, but the thing is the ultimate question is who is ultimately in charge of whether or not those changes and proposals get adopted, right? And it's not that cabal. They can do whatever they want, but the entire world of Bitcoiners votes on it all day, every day, about whether or not those forks, especially hard forks, soft forks, whatever, get adopted. And that's where That's where the diffusion of control and responsibility actually, to me, is
All right. So
material.
these are two specific elements that I want to address. Number one is who controls Bitcoin, and number two, how do we determine which version of Bitcoin is the industry standard, the dominant one? So your answer to that seems to be this nebulous thing of every day people vote by doing this and that, and whichever one, I guess, whichever version of Bitcoin trades for the most money is the dominant one. Would you say that's at least?
No, 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 no. I mean, like, it, I guess. So we're getting into some
But it's
technical
important,
stuff
though. It's
that,
important.
like, I'm out of my depth. It is.
When you make
And
a
I'm
claim, when you
probably
make a
not
claim
going
that
to.
the public determines what version of Bitcoin becomes Bitcoin, we have to ask by what mechanism, who's involved, how does that happen? Because in every other traditional area of society where there is, because we're talking about consensus, basically, we're talking about a critical mass of people make a decision to adopt something, whether it's who the leader is of their country, or whether it's whichever version gets to be the official Bitcoin or the unofficial official Bitcoin, right? So it's important to talk about that mechanism, because that mechanism directly, if you look into the mechanism of, like, say, how Netanyahu or Putin got elected versus how Biden got elected, the mechanism matters, as to whether or not whatever the public quote accepted is actually legitimate. And this is a thing I don't find when you start looking into Bitcoin. That mechanism seems very cloudy, right?
Okay. Well, in this case, we may just have to part company on this topic, because I don't feel like I have a whole lot more to offer in drilling down, because we're getting into more technical stuff about the protocol, which is probably actually one of my like weaker elements of what I could speak to.
I'm
So,
not even going to get
um,
technical. I just want to talk just in a philosophical standpoint. Like, as I said, in a standard consensus in, say, America, when we elect people, there's a set of rules.
mhm,
There's a certain day when the election takes place. There's a certain
mhm,
process that people go through. You go down to your polling station, you provide your ID, you go into a booth, you're using these machines. These machines are monitored, they're tabulated. There's certain people that are tasked. It's their job to oversee, to make sure that the elections are done fair. All the votes are tabulated. They're sent to their particular person who's tasked with doing that, and they report it, and it all gets added up. And then, so there's an entire structure there that is supposed to be ideally transparent and accountable. That's what a good, fair election would be, and what's one area that you can qualify how consensus works. In the world of crypto, and this is another section in my documentary, consensus is more of like a word people just throw out. They don't exactly explain how this consensus works. It's just that, BTC is the dominant version of Bitcoin. It's not Bitcoin Cash, BCH.
yeah,
Well, why is
yeah.
that? Well, Bitcoin Cash is
Let
actually
me,
a more efficient version of Bitcoin that can handle more
right.
transactions. So who decided that a less efficient version of Bitcoin would be the one that trades for the most money, right? Who made that decision?
Well, all the people who decided that that's the network that they're going to participate on, and they're not going to participate on the Bitcoin Cash network. The analogy I like to use for this is that,
Well, all right. Well,
you know,
let's.
real quick, let me
Okay.
finish this one thought. So the rules of chess, right, are, everybody knows them. Now, if I decided that, suddenly rooks could move
Mhm.
diagonally, yeah, I could play that on a chessboard. But if I show up to a tournament where other people are playing, nobody's going to play with me. Nobody, like, maybe one or two people decide, like, hey, that's a cool version, I won't
Okay.
play that. But generally speaking, if I go and I sit down across from Magnus Carlsen and I start moving my rook diagonally, he's going to look at me like I'm from outer
Yeah. Right.
space,
Good
right? Like,
analogy.
he's not going to participate in my protocol, and that's that,
Okay.
right?
Let's take that analogy and let's apply it into the world of crypto, because here's what's different. Um, in chess, it is actually a peer-to-peer interaction. It's two people, and both of those peers have to agree on the rules in order for the game to be productive, right? So chess is a great example of a peer-to-peer interaction. In the world of crypto, when you trade crypto with somebody else, it's not actually peer to peer. It's peer to middleman and peer to middleman. So the person you're supposedly
it can be right. Like it depending on middleman. You're talking about exchanges.
Exchanges, but I'm also talking about the ledger itself. The ledger is maintained by a network of middlemen, the miners and the node operators, right? So if you want to, let's say I have a wallet and you have a wallet and you want to send me some Bitcoin, you never actually talk directly with me. All you need is my wallet address, and then you talk with the network, the miners. But the interaction between you and the middlemen node operators modifies an entry in the blockchain. The blockchain is in the middle between us. So it is a middleman. So now,
well, I'd say the blockchain is more than just the middleman. It's like the blockchain is the object in question.
Right, but here's the thing.
That is
it's an independent entity. There's me, there's you, there's the blockchain. Now the blockchain may be composed of thousands of different people running computers, but the fact is that when we transfer value, it's that middle entity whose entries matter, right?
So if I gave you a $5 bill, would you consider the $5 bill the intermediary?
No, the five because
if not, then I have a problem with the analogy, right? Because that dollar bill is acting as the value that's being transferred, same as the blockchain.
Except that dollar bill in and of itself has value outside of the network. Let's say if you give me your private key to your wallet, I can't do anything with that without interacting with the network. So that private key has no value without that middleman. Whereas a dollar bill has value because it doesn't require an intermediary. Well, it does require an intermediary, and that it requires a society to accept it. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Which is almost a good analogy for, I would say, the network, the Bitcoin network, right? Like our society that accepts, if I go into 7-Eleven, they're going to accept that dollar bill, right? Like that's society at large recognizing the value of this object or what it's meant to communicate. And I'd say you could graph that pretty well onto yes. Bitcoin.
Except, hold on. But the difference is subjectivity versus objectivity, right? This is a point I mentioned before. A dollar works whether I believe or agree that the dollar has value or not, because objectively in the society that I exist, it's mandated by law, by a powerful central entity that says this is payable for all debts, public and private. Bitcoin and crypto, and I know you want a distinction, but they both operate the same way in this respect. There is no overseeing authority that says one Bitcoin has value. So that's wholly subjective. Now I know.
Well, isn't that? Wouldn't you be able to just say the public, like it's free and open, right? There is no government standing behind it saying this is worth something. It's very much just the people who are participating on the network who are deciding that value, right? Like I'm deciding what it's worth to me to get that Bitcoin, right? So it's just, it's taking the responsibility away from the government, right? And putting it on the individual to decide what's valuable to them.
If I have fiat in my hand, I could do 1,000 different things with it that I need to do. I can buy groceries, I can pay rent, I can pay my taxes, I can pay all my bills. It's mandated by law, by the state in which I live, the place I've chosen to live, the community that I've become a part of. And in return for being part of that community, I have to agree to certain rules and guidelines and covenants that I have, paying my taxes and using money and following the laws. That's part of the relationship and the partnership I have with the community that I choose to live in. Bitcoin doesn't have any kind of real covenant. It's all subjective. If you decide that you want to attribute value to it, that's totally cool. But you can't pay your rent in it. You can't pay your taxes in it. You can't do any of those things because there's no authority mandating it. And so,
well, to me that obstacle, right, of like you can't pay for X for Bitcoin. Every time I hear that, I always imagine. You can tell I'm using all the analogies. It's kind of how my thought process works. I think of it as, well, I own a precious piece of art, perhaps, or, the house that I live in, or a car. I can't pay for things in those material things either. And that's right now, at least for the time being, that's closer to what Bitcoin represents in terms of its like
I'd agree.
utility, right? Like it's more of a thing than it is a currency. For it to become a currency, there's going to have to be a whole lot of stuff change and a whole lot of stuff done.
I think most of us,
and that's why I focus on it as kind of a value prop, a value.
So
store.
it's a speculative commodity. It's an item that some people believe has value, and I can't argue that. I can't argue that your impression of the value of Bitcoin is invalid. It's your feelings. But what I can say objectively is that that you can't walk around in mainstream society and buy the things that you need to survive with Bitcoin. It's too cumbersome, and most people don't want to mess with it for a wide variety of reasons. So it doesn't have a tremendous amount of utility, but I certainly respect you may attribute personal value to it, just like you would a piece of art or a Beanie Baby. But I would say at the end of the day, even Beanie Babies and art have a little bit more intrinsic value than crypto.
Okay, intrinsic value. I knew this would come up at some point, and I've struggled with the concept of intrinsic value because every time I see it used in the context of this discussion, it makes me wonder, like, where is that coming from, right? Like, I can't seem to be able to assign intrinsic value to anything that either isn't sustenance or shelter, right? Because like, these things are necessary to maintain life. And so when you say intrinsic, I drill down really, really far. Like I've got, you can have tchotchkes around your house, whatever, your blender, right? What intrinsic value does your blender have? It's not, I can't eat it.
But you could use it to prepare food in certain situations.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a tool in some degree, and that's one of the things that I'm at present in my situation, in my shoes, I'm using Bitcoin exclusively as a store of value and to make sure that like my wealth and my value that I've accrued over time is not whittled away.
Right.
So that is really like, that's the kind of like why I'm here. That's even why I'm on the call right now, right? That's what got me stuck to Bitcoin. I started out, right, as I said, in the speculator mode, and then I kind of moved into the investor mode. And now I'd say I'm beyond the investor mode, and I'm at like adherent mode, where I have converted all of my wealth, all of my long-term savings into Bitcoin, and I plan on, keeping that as long as I can.
Dude, I really wish I could convince you otherwise not to do that. But so let's talk about value and intrinsic value. It's not a binary proposition. It's not like something either has intrinsic value or has no intrinsic value. Although it is kind of a spectrum, right? As you said, fresh water would have objectively more intrinsic value than, say, a blender, But a blender does have intrinsic value. It has more intrinsic value than, say, a photograph, And a photograph would have more intrinsic value than, say, a gift card from Chipotle that is expired. Okay.
See, I'm really struggling here because to me, the whole intrinsic value thing, I can't get behind it. I feel like that is as subjective.
Well, let's look at well, there is always some subjectivity, right? But when people say intrinsic value, I think what they're doing, and they may not even know it when they say it, but I feel like the heart of that phrase or that term is people saying there is an amount of value here that is universally known and understood, and it's part of just the ethos of like the existence of this thing and its self-evident. Let me give you an example, okay?
And I don't think that is true anywhere other than, like I said, a ham sandwich or the building that I call home. Like that's as far as I can go. Anything beyond those things that sustain my being, I fail to see intrinsic value in them.
Suffice to say, the concept of intrinsic value can also be contextual, right? We would both agree that clean fresh water has objectively intrinsic value. But if I live next to a lake that has plenty of clean, fresh water, somebody's little jug of water is nowhere near as valuable to me because I already have plenty of
Right.
it.
And that's just supply and demand at play, right? Yeah.
And the same thing goes for all these other things like gasoline, fuel. It objectively has value, but if I don't have any kind of machine that would use the fuel, it's not particularly valuable to me. But in a larger sense, in a society where a lot of things run on fuel, generators and vehicles and stuff like that, it objectively has a certain high degree of intrinsic value. So it's not always a on or off thing, but in a general sense, intrinsic value is when you have something that objectively, more often than not, is of use to people in a wide variety of situations. And that's going to be a spectrum. But and at one end of the spectrum, you have stuff like food and water, which is unquestionably valuable in just about any scenario, any culture. At the other end of the spectrum, you have stuff that is not terribly useful, hardly at all, and way on the other side, you have stuff like, old comic books and Star Wars action figures where they're not, there's only useful to a tiny amount of people that read it as a kid and attribute value to it. And way to the way to the left of that is Bitcoin and crypto, which has no material use. Even a comic book or a Beanie Baby has some material use, whereas crypto doesn't. So on that spectrum, way at the other end is crypto.
Yeah, I think a term that might be more appropriate than intrinsic value might be contextual value
or extrinsic value. Extrinsic value is based on what other people's opinions are. For example,
yeah, that comic book you were talking about, right? The contextual value of that is like, okay, well, it's just paper and maybe I read it and maybe it's slightly entertaining. But in the context of like a kid who grew up reading those comics and is now, in his 50s or 60s.
And he remembers it and he wants to relive his childhood. He'll pay a premium for it. Yes.
Right.
That would be extrinsic versus intrinsic value. Intrinsic value would be the value of the paper it's printed on, the information that it conveys that could be of use to a wider variety of people, regardless of whether or not they had any kind of special emotional attachment. Extrinsic value could be based on marketing. If suddenly everybody decides that this particular brand of plush animals are now more sought after and more collectible because of a promotion, a hype thing, then the extrinsic value pumps up their trading value and volume. But at the end of the day, there's a certain baseline, like Beanie Babies now. They're still around, but they're no longer collectible and they're no longer considered an investment. But they have a base value of a couple of bucks a piece just as plush toys. So,
well, maybe the contextual value example is better like this. So if I had a time machine and I hopped in a Tesla and went back to the year 1700, the Tesla would not be very useful, right? There's no roads, there's no way to charge it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the value of that thing effectively just turned into like, or whatever I can strip it out for, raw materials, maybe. Whereas it would be worth a lot more to me in a context, a year in time where there were things to support it, right? The
Absolutely.
roads, the charging stations. And that's where grafting that onto Bitcoin, right? Like right now, I can't go down the street and buy a big gulp with it, right? But if you take a look at like what they're building on top of the network, all these additional layer technologies, right? They're trying to enable such a thing because right now it's just sitting. It's sitting. Yeah, they've been trying to for years, and they will keep trying for many more years, at least until unless there's some black swan.
Okay,
event.
so let's say we wave a magic wand, and now you can buy a Slurpee with Bitcoin. How is that better than buying a Slurpee with cash or with a credit card?
Well, the funny thing is,
that's the ultimate crypto question there. That's the question I keep asking.
Yeah, well, I'm on your side with this one, where I don't think Bitcoin has to become a currency to actually serve a purpose.
I think that's just admitting it's a crappy currency, so I'm going to just pretend I never really thought it was that great of a currency in the first place.
Well, like I said a few minutes ago, right? Like I'm using it as a store of value. That's my primary use case, and to me, that's really the most important use
All right.
case.
So have you read the white paper, Satoshi's white paper?
It's been years.
Do you know what the title of it is?
Peer-to-peer cashless system, I believe.
It wasn't a peer-to-peer store of value or investment. He designed it as a currency system.
Yeah, well, I don't think did he use the term currency anywhere in the paper? I think that was suspiciously absent.
Currency, cash. I mean, I think we're on the same page there.
Well, regardless, a lot of inventors, sometimes it could be hard to see what your invention actually may end up being. But I think the store of value argument, you have to spend a lot of time talking about, fiat currency and what makes something valuable, right? And that's really where I'm probably most comfortable and where I've done the most amount of thinking and research on this is in that realm of how do I maintain, and like I said, that example of right before COVID, right, when I'm saving up for my house and I'm sitting on this store of cash and I don't want to see it, I don't want to lose it in any investment, but I also don't want it to just sit there and do nothing. Like, so that's really what brought me here and why I'm here today.
But here's an interesting thing, right? So you believe Bitcoin is a store of value, and is it just a coincidence that you happen to hold Bitcoin at the same time that you believe it's a store of value?
Well, I've come to that conclusion.
Because isn't it funny that it's almost exclusively people that hold Bitcoin that believe it's a store of value, and the people that don't believe it's a store of value? Isn't that odd?
I don't know I mean, I'd say on the whole, right? Like there's obviously going to be some bias cooked into the equation there where it's like, yeah, I hold this thing, therefore I think it's valuable. It's not impossible to find somebody who's, maybe a finance guru or whatever else who considers it a store of value. But the baseline argument that I have for the store of value is that this is something that effectively is immortal, right? Like cannot be changed.
Okay.
And when you have something that's scarce and immortal, scarcity does not imply value on its own, but I'd say it's a necessary component of a larger picture. So those are right. So
stop. We have to stop because again, this is you just posited two specific points that I would disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
You claim it's scarce and you claim it's immortal. Pick one and let's address it.
Okay. Well, the scarcity thing. I mean, it's in the protocol, right?
Okay, let's talk
so
scarcity.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin protocol says that there's only 21 million that will be made.
Mm-hmm.
Now this can be drilled into on multiple levels, and I find it actually pretty fascinating. And I can get technical or I can get philosophical, but let's just pull back a little bit. There's only potentially 21 million BTC that will be in circulation. And the only reason that limitation is in there is because it's like one line in the code that could be changed. And anybody, you yourself said, you can, take the source code and you can create your...
I could propose that change, yeah.
It's entirely possible that in the future, consensus may want there to be more, especially if, for example, as the mining rewards start to diminish, there's going to be less incentive for people to operate the blockchain, which this falls into your other claim about it being immortal, right? The only way that Bitcoin exists is if its network continues to operate. And its network is run by a bunch of self-interested third parties that are not doing it out of the kindness of their heart, and they're not getting paid by any central authority. They're only doing it because it's profitable for them to maintain the network. And if it stops becoming profitable, then there's no motivation for them to run the network. And if enough of them...
It'll collapse at that point.
And it will cease to exist. So that's one way that Bitcoin can cease to exist and not be forever. Another way would be for nation states to just ban it, right? And that has happened in some jurisdiction. Now, they can't necessarily knock 100% out.
Well,
they can't knock 100% of it.
Yeah, I disagree. I disagree that nations banning it is going to do anything.
Well, here's the thing to think about. Since since Bitcoin is a public network and there is no central authority, there's no way to determine who is a good or a bad actor on the network. Because if you run a node, the nodes all have to identify themselves to each other. As a network administrator, let's say I'm control the computers in a big company that has 10,000 employees, I can say no Bitcoin mining is allowed on our network. No Bitcoin transactions are allowed on our network, and I can put a couple of lines into my router and eliminate all that traffic. Now, that won't eliminate all traffic everywhere, but if enough people do that, it will cripple the network to the point where it can't function, because this is a public network and it requires as many people to access. And of course, if it's not convenient for you to use this technology, you're going to move to something else. So we don't have to knock out 100% or maybe even 75% of the traffic to make Bitcoin no longer practical to use. And from a technical standpoint, it's very easy to do so, because there is no authority to say, I'm going to route this stuff around these guys because I don't trust them. Everybody has to be able to identify the other nodes in the network. So there's that way. And then there's the other thing of the Bitcoin network operates on top of the existing internet, and the existing internet is controlled by a small group of powerful special interests, whether it's, the half dozen ISPs that control the backbone, or whether it's the nation states that control the right of way, monitor the frequencies in which everybody communicates. But they can all at any time.
Bitcoin goes as the internet goes.
But they can. I mean, look at online gambling. Now, they couldn't a particular jurisdiction, or even recently with say in the state of Texas, they've required people to age verify before they access porn, right? So the state of Texas passes a law that says you can't go to Pornhub unless you prove you're an adult. Obviously, there's ways of getting around that. You can use a VPN, right? And you can pretend you're not from Texas. But just that law probably cut down on a tremendous amount of people in Texas being able to access it. Now they have to find a workaround, but that workaround could still be addressed too. That Texas could pass a law that says anybody using a VPN is illegal. And they could theoretically shut down, they don't have to shut down the internet. They could just shut down one particular flavor of traffic on the internet if they wanted to. And again, they may not be able to shut 100% of it down, but they could certainly, if they wanted to, shut down enough of it to render it no longer adequately functional. And this is certainly possible with crypto and Bitcoin. Now, it might not be probable in this current anti-regulatory climate.
That's that's the black swan I think I was referencing earlier, right? Like the black swans I have in my mind that like wipe all this out are basically, okay, we have some type of event where the internet as we know it ceases to exist, right? The other type of event would be something extremely unlikely, like enough nations getting together to coordinate an attack against Bitcoin, which I think an asteroid hitting the planet probably is more likely than that getting, or maybe an
EMP or a solar flare, right? An EMP could knock out a lot of.
The thing about something like that is that Bitcoin would effectively freeze in time, right? Like you've got, okay, boom, the bomb went off, electricity, internet everywhere is shut down. Well, all you have now are effectively just a bunch of dormant nodes, right? Like the ledger itself is still dispersed and is still what it was, but when it comes time to start it back up, it'll be exactly as it was.
Not necessarily. Maybe there's a group of people in one little area that create their own network and continue to operate the blockchain.
You could have that, but that's where the consensus mechanism
and
comes
we come back,
right?
We come back, and so how, again, now back to the consensus, how do we determine which, and this is there was an analogy that you used, the chess analogy. Let's get back to that, right? Mm-hmm. So you said, well, if I decide a rook can move diagonally, that's no longer valid. You wouldn't accept that, right? So let's take that analogy, but let's put it in the world of crypto. So most crypto trades, as I said, are not peer-to-peer. They're peer to a middleman, right? So you have two different types of trades. You have the standard trade that happens on blockchain, where one person sends crypto to another. But
well, wait a minute. You said that there's two. You have to unbox that for me real quick. So two types of
I'm about to explain why.
A trade peer to peer and a trade to the middleman. Because I thought what you explained earlier was that every trade has a middleman because the ledger is.
I'm not saying.
Right?
I did say there's two types of trades, but I'm not saying the other one is peer to peer. Okay, there's there's two types of ways that crypto gets traded. One is, when I say P2P, I mean one person sending it to another person on chain, but it still involves a middleman, right? But the other most common way that crypto is traded is at exchanges, right? The vast majority of all crypto trades are done off-chain. They're done on Binance and Bitfinex and Coinbase. So you send your money to Coinbase's wallet. Coinbase maintains custody of it. And then you trade on their private proprietary system, right? So let's use the chess analogy there. Let's say Coinbase is where you're playing chess. Coinbase decides that rooks can move diagonally. Now, everybody that's Coinbase's customer has to accept that new rule. If they don't, they can leave, but guess what? Coinbase has got custody of your money, and if Coinbase hassles you too much, you're screwed.
Yep.
And so 99.999% of most crypto trades happen on these exchanges. So what would happen if Coinbase arbitrarily decided that they wanted to modify the Bitcoin source code and increase it from 21 million to 31 million? And they imposed it unilaterally on their customer base. And they said to their customer base, you can't move your crypto off chain. It's tied to this new chain. We will only move crypto from our system to the new chain that now has 31 million. And oh, by the way, read the terms of service. You agreed to this when you signed up.
Yeah, you agreed to it.
Because
right?
every crypto exchange basically has in their terms of service that we can do whatever the fuck we want with your shit for no reason at all. It's in the terms of service.
And I'll do you one better. Not only is that a threat with the exchanges, that's also a threat with these ETF holders.
Yes. Yeah, the ETF holders, they're under no obligation to take your liquidity and put it into BTC. They could suddenly decide that they want to put it into BSV or BCH.
Yeah, they're going to make BlackRock coin, and that's what you own now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's the beauty of
no, I mean,
of the
I don't deny these risks at all. In fact, that you're making a very well articulated case for self custody.
but self custody has, you can look at your computer and see some numbers and go, there's my wealth. But again, transferring that into something that you can use in the real world, you have to once again deal with these nefarious third parties. Even Local Bitcoins? There was a site called Local Bitcoins that would hook peers to be able to trade with it.
like a Match.com
for crypto people, for money laundering. As a Match.com for money laundering. And of course that got shut down because it facilitated a lot of criminal activity. So like it or not, I know crypto people kind of believe that at some point all these nation states and all these companies are just going to magically decide to accept crypto natively. But every single time that is tried to happen, it has failed miserably. I'm sure you know about that history.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Well, they don't have any incentive right now, right? Like it's all Bitcoin is threatening their control and their hegemony over their currency, right? It's a threat to their autonomy and their ability to have control and govern as they see
Who's
fit,
they? You mean
right?
governments?
I lost my train of thought. But
you said Bitcoin represents a threat to their autonomy. So governments.
Yeah, exactly. Like, right.
Well, understand that governments have a monetary system that they use, that they've been slowly evolving, depending upon the country, for millennia, maybe not, or centuries. Mm-hmm. And that's the liquidity, the fuel that runs society. It makes the trash disappear. It makes running water flow. It makes roads travelable, navigable, and waterways and levees. And that's their ecosystem. It would make no sense for any nation state to embrace a liquidity system that unapologetically wants to bypass all the systems that provide the resources everybody needs. So
that's true. That's true, except for when you get down lower on the totem pole, right? Like the more powerful the country is, the more first world that country is, the less of an appetite they have for the Bitcoin standard, right? Like that's why you see like higher adoption rates. Like that's why you see El Salvador doing what El Salvador did, right? Like they struck, especially hit rock bottom, and they're like, well, we're going to go to a completely hard money standard.
It's not a hard money standard, though. I mean, that's another talking point. It's all arbitrary. And else,
how is it not a hard money though?
Like I said, it's subjective whether or not. Although you okay, let's talk about El Salvador, okay? Because El Salvador has mandated Bitcoin as their official currency, but that's also an illusion, okay? Because number one, the main currency in El Salvador is the U.S. dollar. So they added Bitcoin to their so it's an alternative to their standard currency, and the vast majority of people, more than 80%, are primarily transacting in USD. So they're
surprised it's not higher.
Yeah, and it might be, but so that experiment in Bitcoin hasn't proven to be successful. The volatility of Bitcoin has made it really not good as a currency, but more importantly,
you'll get no argument from me that Bitcoin is not ready to be a currency. Like
pointing to El Salvador
fully sign
as
on to
a
that.
success story is disingenuous.
No. I'm not pointing it to a success.
Or even as an example of something that's functional. Here's something else. I think anybody who really believes in Bitcoin should be angry at what El Salvador has done, and this is why. Because El Salvador has basically just licensed the Bitcoin logo, right? And then they've created their own private exchange and a private wallet system called Chivo and Chivo or whatever it is. And they're operating a private crypto exchange that is non-transparent, whose software and source code is not open source, and nobody has any idea what's going on in that exchange. The amount of Bitcoin that El Salvador says they bought off of the blockchain versus how much is actually in their internal system, we have no way of knowing if that reconciles. They could have 3 times more Bitcoin on Chivo than they actually own, and as long as people can't move it off of, they basically have taken the Bitcoin brand name and applied it to their own private non-system. So it's not really the whole point, right? Bitcoin is supposed to be accountable on the blockchain, but none of these systems, all the trades are happening on these private, centralized exchanges that are run by people that are located in nefarious areas outside of regulatory oversight. None of these people are being properly independently audited. There's no regulations. There's no SEC really looking at what's going on at Binance or Coinbase. A brokerage house has a lot of rules and regulations they have to follow. They have to guarantee how much liquidity they have. Coinbase doesn't have to do any of that because they're not licensed in the same way that Robinhood or E-Trade would be licensed. They're not, their accounts are not FDIC insured, et cetera.
All of this sounds like you're making great arguments for more transparency, right? Like you're pointing out these flaws, and that's good. We need people to watchdog that, because the whole point of the project is open and transparent, right? So I'm hearing a lot of good things about like, okay, well, this is what's wrong with it, and I think it can be fixed. Like to me, it's more of an argument of, okay, we need to move to a more transparent system, not we need to move off this thing entirely.
But again, we still have never answered the ultimate crypto question of what does Bitcoin do that's better than what we already have. You argue that it needs some of the same features of our existing system. Well, we've got an existing system that has all those features. So why go through all the hassle of incorporating it into Bitcoin?
That's funny. I think we've made it an hour now, and now we're back on the first question that we asked each other is blockchain and what is it going to do for me, or has it done for me? And one of the things that rankles me when I hear people focus on blockchain is that they leave off, like, blockchain is effectively nothing, in my opinion, if not backed up by proof of work, because that's where the real differentiation comes in, is that there has to be some type of cost incurred, some type of friction to make the blockchain worthwhile. Otherwise, you've just got, effectively a database that anybody can edit, and now you're off your hard money standard. You've just got, effectively a soft money standard. So
okay, well, let's address this.
Without proof of work, there's nothing there.
Let's address proof of work. So proof of work, the concept of it is basically to make it expensive to operate the network, and that's supposed to stop bad actors, right? If it costs a lot of money to operate the nodes, then this ensures the network is secure. But in reality, all it really does is just make it more expensive for bad actors to operate things. It doesn't eliminate the possibility that the network can be hacked. We now have mining consortiums that are close to having 51% control of the blockchain. They could arbitrarily choose to mess with the blockchain and rearrange it however they wanted. And again, it goes back to that consensus mechanism. If Coinbase suddenly decided to do something sketchy, or let's say Coinbase and Binance and BlackRock all decided that they were going to move everything from BTC to BCH, there's a very good possibility that whichever one trades for the highest amount of money is where everybody's going to migrate. I mean, a lot of people are going to be upset if you were a bag holder and they picked the wrong one, but again, it's all these on and off ramps which are controlled by private special interests that are centralized that really do call the shots. I wouldn't underestimate the power Coinbase and Bitfinex and Binance and Tether and BlackRock have. As this industry becomes more consolidated, it becomes exactly the opposite of what Bitcoin purists believe.
No, you're totally correct there. Like, there is a big problem to be addressed with the consolidation to one, right? Like that's the complete antithesis of the project. It's why, I personally, I'm just one man, right? I only have so much influence on the world at large, but, I don't interact with those for that particular reason. If the mining consortium stuff is consolidating that much, that scares me too. I'm not as up to date on that stuff, but I think the whole, ideally, it would be the free market at play, and you would have, okay, well, if they're making enough money, if they're making so much money, I'm going to get in it too, and it's going to keep it dispersed and keep it nice and wide. But if you have that much consolidation, you're in trouble. So I don't disagree with any of those points. I really don't.
I think what we're seeing here with crypto is kind of speed running all the trials and tribulations of the wildcat banking era. And the ultimate conclusion that you're going to find is not one that you really want to accept, which is that we do need centralized authorities. The only way to really stop bad actors is to have a central repository of here's what a bad actor is, and here's the entity that we've tasked with stopping them. All the other methods of rational self-interest and, the libertarian buzzwords about the community will police itself, in practice, that never seems to happen. That's why you never see these anarcho-libertarian communities exist anywhere, because this notion of giving everybody the freedom and everybody will make the right decisions never does seem to turn out, right?
Yeah, I guess we're all going to find out the answer to that ultimate question, right? Because that's really what this experiment is. I'm I guess apropos of nothing, but I'm actually.
But you can look at history
liberal.
And see how things turn out. This is the thing that bugs us, right? Is that Bitcoin is not the first cryptocurrency, and there's been lots of other similar systems that have failed, and you can look and see how they failed, and you can see that Bitcoin is on track to fail in exactly the same way as most of them have failed. Bitcoin has failed multiple times. The fact that it's decentralized and it's not under anybody's control has actually allowed it to exist a little bit longer because it keeps repackaging itself.
And say you might want to choose a different word than fail, because
it has failed.
Something shouldn't be able to fail multiple times. I mean, by nature, right? Like if it's failed, it's over, it's done. So
well, it's failed at being a currency, and it's not really being marketed as that. Now it's being marketed as digital gold, as a store of value.
Well, I think people just got over their skis with the whole currency thing, right? Like that's where I probably, in my journey, in my experience, like got way too focused on, yeah, this is going to be the next currency technology. And then over time, I've kind of settled into, I don't really mind having to go through the intermediary of the US dollar or any type of fiat currency. That can be a layer two technology for as long as it wants to be. And I can slide my wealth in and out of that network and happily pay the fee as long as, my asset, my crypto asset that I control stays pristine, right? So the moment that there's any type of danger to that, there's any type of risk that is too great, yeah, you'll see me getting out on the first chopper.
Well, there's an old adage called if you can't beat them, join them, right? And so Bitcoin was initially marketed as something that could beat fiat. And that's proven to fail. Bitcoin can't beat fiat. So now it's like, okay, we'll peacefully coexist with fiat. It's the same thing. It's that.
Well, I think like I said, I think this might be a timeline question as well. Like I'm looking at this through hundreds and thousands of years, and you're looking at it through the tech startup narrow window. So the window you're looking at it through, it's like, yeah, all these things that came out of the gate trying to do, yeah, it objectively failed because they overshot their goal. And I'm of the opinion that we have tons of runway to make this transition, and it needs to be smooth. It shouldn't be, too fast, too rough. And we'll get there eventually. I believe that the need is there. I believe that the pathway is clear. It's just a matter of time at this point. So if I'm wrong, I will probably die penniless in a ditch somewhere. But for now,
well, you seem like a smart guy. I hope that you will try to consolidate your value into more stable, quote, investments before you actually end up penniless.
Well, I've got enough time until retirement. I can recover, but at this point, I guess, I don't know. I'm really early adopter, I'd say, in terms of being the kind of person who would convert his entire IRA into Bitcoin and that type of stuff.
So you really have done that?
I don't have any. Oh yeah,
Shit,
like I'm 1,000,000%.
I got to be honest. We in the crypto critical community, we think you guys are like little unicorns. That you don't actually exist. That people are posting this. Like they've got $300 in Bitcoin and they make a post saying, I just got a home equity line of credit on my house and I put it all into Bitcoin. We just, that's what we think. We cannot believe that anybody would really go all in. So you're telling me, can you share with us like how much you've actually put into?
Yeah, I can share those details. So real quick though, about the folks who like leverage, if I were single, I would probably be leveraging hard into Bitcoin. I have that much conviction about it. I'm not. I have a family. I have other people even though I have about as much conviction in Bitcoin as could possibly be, at the end of the day, I do have to look my kids in the eye and you know what I mean? It just changes the calculus, right? So anyway, I wouldn't be that aggressive, but like I said, all of my long-term savings, every bit of value that I possess, which I do not anticipate needing to leverage in the next 4 years, is in Bitcoin. That includes, like I said, retirement accounts, whatever else.
So everything. Are we talking a couple 100,000 more or less?
Well, when I started, so I mean, this is all luck and timing, right? So I'm not like, haha, look at this big stack. I think I had maybe like $250,000 in retirement saved up at that point when I did the full conversion, and now I'm a little over $1 million. So I've in terms of fiat measurement of my investment, I think I don't know the total number of Bitcoin.
Okay, so you have 1 million in Bitcoin.
Yes.
Is it in one single wallet? Is it spread across multiple wallets? Is any of it on exchanges?
None of it's on an exchange, and never will be. Nothing I have is on an exchange.
Well, it will have to be if you ever want to liquidate it.
Yeah, when it comes time to liquidate, and that's another question. It's like, well, what do I do when it's time, right? Like, what kind of world am I going to be staring at in terms of financial tools that I can use Bitcoin for? But
so what?
I'm sorry, you were saying. Well, okay, so yeah, I have a real quick. I have a multi-signature solution that I use, and I also have an inheritance plan set up, a protocol where if God forbid something were to happen to me, my family could find the information about how to access the funds. And I do keep, like I said, any funds that are not anticipated to need to be accessed in the next 4 years. I do keep those on a traditional exchange, I guess you'd call it, like something like Fidelity or Vanguard. And that's immediate low tech money that my family could access to pay the bills while they're figuring out what to do with my estate.
So, how is your Bitcoin all in one wallet? Is it spread across multiple wallets?
Yes.
Multiple.
Multiple.
How many different wallets would you say you have?
Just two.
Okay, so you have two wallets, and so those two wallets comprise approximately $1 million worth of Bitcoin.
Correct.
God, that's so scary, though. That if because there's stories each and every day of somebody just waking up one morning and their wallet's been drained and they don't know why or how. That doesn't scare you?
It doesn't scare me because I've followed the protocol,
But
right? Like none of my stuff
every
has ever...
day there's somebody who says the same thing. Who said, I followed the protocol. I kept it private. I never stored it on this, and something still happened.
Yeah, usually in every single one of those cases, somebody very clearly put their stuff on a hot wire on the internet, and I've been completely cold for my storage. Nothing has ever seen the internet, will see the internet. It's a multi-signature solution, so you have to actually go to, two different physical places in the world. I have a third party that also holds onto a key in the event of, some type of problem on my end where, hey, I can't access enough of my keys to get the multi-sig completed.
So what's your cost basis of all your Bitcoin right now?
Oh, I have no idea. I stopped keeping track of that a long time ago.
You wouldn't want to keep track of that? Why not? You're just waiting until everybody starts doing all their commerce in BTC so that you don't have to worry about a cost basis?
No, my basic plan is I feel like in the next 10 years I can retire. And when I say retire, I mean effectively stop working to live, right? Like just doing what I want, and still have enough money to, make it to the end of, of my rope while allowing my kids to grow up and have the support that they need and that type of stuff.
So it sounds like I assume you're familiar with the term FIRE?
Yeah.
FIRE,
yeah.
which stands for
retire
financial
early,
independence, retire early. There's a movement of people that are very aggressively looking for ways in which they can maximize their income to the point where they can retire early. And there's all different types of firing, right? There's aggressive ones and there's liberal and conservative ones. There's ones called fat fire where you try to live comfortably along the way while you're still planning.
Right.
I'm not sure what this version of it would be, but it sounds like what you want to do is obviously retire early and come up with a lot of money, but it just seems very, very risky putting it all on crypto.
Well, the way that I've come to know this is that risk and volatility are two entirely different things, right? Risk would be what we were talking about earlier, right? Like some type of attack on Bitcoin, somebody able to adulterate it, change it in some way, and devalue it and debase it. And to me, that risk is infinitesimally small. Yes, that risk is about as close to zero as anything. Like, for example, and the reason I've landed on Bitcoin is that I looked at every other place I could store my money and what could happen to it in a catastrophic way, right? What could devalue it significantly. And Bitcoin was the one I landed on that carried the least amount of risk with it. Now, the volatility is a completely different story, right? Like I wake up and boom, it's dropped 5%, right? Like the up and down, like that's why I've pushed everything off and said, if I'm putting it into Bitcoin, I'm putting it in the
So
freezer.
You think Bitcoin has the least points of catastrophic failure? Okay,
yes.
let's just address that. I'm just going to say one word. You know what word I'm going to say?
Hit me.
Tether. What's your reaction to that? You don't think that's a potential catastrophic point of failure?
I don't honestly follow Tether, don't know anything about it, and don't care to.
Wow. Okay, so it just blows me away that you'll put so much of your life savings into a system and you're not aware of how Tether affects the Bitcoin market.
I mean, does it plan on affecting it in the next, 10 to 20 years? I don't know. What is
in the next 10 to 20 minutes as well? Yes. Well, Tether, they're
Well, 10 to 20 minutes, like I said, is of no concern to me. This is long-term stuff. So the volatility of whatever Tether's got cooking or whatever possibility there is there, I'm got a much broader time horizon than that.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Just on the surface, we have all these crypto exchanges, which basically set the price of Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin is set by no more than a half dozen centralized exchanges that are subject to no regulatory oversight. So ignoring the fact that we have no idea how much actual liquidity any of them have and whether the trades that they're claiming are actually organic or whether they're just bots, right? One thing we do know is that there is more than $100 billion of USDT that all of these exchanges use as a proxy for fiat, as actual currency. Despite there not being adequate evidence, that liquidity is real. So what you've got is, just from what we know of this shady market, there's hundreds of billions of dollars of monopoly money that is being traded back and forth for Bitcoin that is driving up the price. And every time you see a rally in the price of Bitcoin, if you look at the amount of Tether that has been put into circulation, you'll see a correlation there. And this is something that many of us in the community pay very close attention to. Whenever Bitcoin goes up, there's usually an instance of the company behind Tether printing billions of USDT and injecting it into the market. And when FTX collapsed, we saw that FTX had colluded with Tether to introduce like more than $40 billion worth of USDT into the market. We still don't know where this liquidity is. So the whole rising price of Bitcoin appears to be directly correlated with the amount of this Tether in the market. It's pretended to be as if it's a regular dollar, despite there not being any evidence of the liquidity. So the cost basis, the price of Bitcoin itself, is kind of suspect, and it's highly dependent upon these stable coins. So if you are concerned about your investment, you got to be concerned about where the liquidity is in the market that's driving it. And this is a thing that a lot of people feel. This is centralized. You have this one company that has got $100 billion worth of tokens that is being freely traded back and forth for Bitcoin and other cryptos. And if you look at their terms of service, they reserve the right to refuse to redeem anybody's tokens. Nobody knows where all of their money actually is. They've never been formally independently audited. So,
yeah,
and they've been outlawed in New York. They've been outlawed. They just were recently outlawed in Europe in different areas. So the noose is tightening around Tether, and that's $100 billion of money that's in the market that really could cause them some major issues for the price of Bitcoin.
I mean, I guess that's where I'm failing to draw the line from one to the other, right? Like you've done obviously enough research into that. You see some warning signs. Like, I'm all ears on that type of stuff. That's cool. Like, I'll take a look at whatever you find concerning. But generally speaking, like I said, I don't really pay any attention to anything outside of Bitcoin. And, we've spent a lot of time talking about altcoins and exchanges, which are just really not part of my life in any way, shape, or form. And so if there's something that's going on there that could affect me, I'd like to know about it. Yeah, well,
Tether is actively traded as if it's a dollar, right? So if you think, if the value of your portfolio is being measured in dollars, part of that value is pumped up by these stable coins that act as proxies for actual money. And that's what most of the trading activity is across these exchanges, and that's what's setting the price, whether it goes up or down. Now, obviously, you want the price to go up so that your quote, investment increases over time. But if the price is going up because it's being traded for monopoly money for which nobody knows the liquidity's there, that should be a big concern because your whole price metric is an illusion. So you can't really not afford to pay attention to this because these exchanges, they're not going back and forth with cash. They cannot find banking partners because of the anti-money laundering and the sanctions rules. That's why they've invented this intermediary stablecoin stuff. So that's a unique feature of crypto that has the capacity to completely make the market collapse. If Tether implodes, it's going to take down every other part of the crypto market, including Bitcoin. The degree to which it takes it down, we don't know. Will the price drop by 50%? Will it drop by 80%? Nobody knows.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much well prepared for those type of drawdowns, right? Like I went into this knowing I'm fully expecting, for example, like at the end of, so we entered a bull run a little early now, it seems, but in about a year's time, I'm fully expecting, 50, 60, 70% drawdown, whatever. I've kind of packed all that in, right? So if there's some kind of existential threat as far as Tether is concerned, right? Like I obviously would be remiss if I didn't learn about that, but I don't know. I'm having trouble, and no fault of your own, because this is obviously hard to explain in a matter of few minutes, exactly where the danger lies and so on and so forth. And if it is an existential threat, right? So,
and many of us do believe it is, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fair. So, like I said, I will happily take a look at whatever you think is like, this is not kosher.
Well, I gotta say, I think this has been a fun, interesting conversation. I could go on a lot longer, but I know that we've just got a certain allotment of time. But I would say if you want to come back on and continue the conversation, I think it'd be cool.
Yeah, for sure. You know, what's funny is that I consider myself kind of a closeted Bitcoiner. You are the first real life human being I've actually talked about this in real time with ever. Like most of the time it's just been, the random internet, comment section type of crap, which is just worthless right. for the most part. But having an honest to God conversation with somebody, I have not told family or friends about, it's my finances, right? I can do as I please. I don't have to tell anybody what I'm doing. But it feels good to engage with somebody about this space in real time and, have an above the board, honest conversation about how you feel about it and what's going on. So I would love to come back and, as major events happen or whatever else, or, because I don't plan on, my situation should largely stay the same. So if you want to hear from the weird Bitcoin maximalist, you can have me back on.
No, I actually think there's a lot more interesting stuff we could talk about. We just don't really have time right now. But
yeah, no worries. But hey, Adam, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Let's continue this. And also take a look into Tether. And then maybe you might want to talk a little bit more about that. I understand if you're just, your long-term kind of thing for this, but I do think, if you're right and I'm wrong, then there really should be no harm in entertaining the ideas that I'm presenting, right? They should be able to withstand my scrutiny.
For sure. Absolutely. That's 100% right.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. We'll continue this maybe in another episode.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks,
right.
Adam. Take care.
So there you have it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in thus far and listening to the show. And be sure to visit IORadio.org, where you can see all the other episodes. Our podcast is also available on all the major platforms, iTunes, Amazon, whatever. And also our YouTube channel, YouTube/American Scream Video, where you could watch the documentary that is mentioned in this. And if you go to IORadio.org, you can find our crypto talking point list there, where we address a bunch of stuff too. And as always, thanks everybody for your support, and be sure to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.